Okay, welcome everybody to another joint webinar interview between 180 Circle and responsive.org. I'm Glenn Marks and delighted today to introduce Sheella Mierson. Today we're going to talk, do a little bit of a deep dive into sociocracy. So welcome, Sheella. Great to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So before we go into some of the details about sociocracy, tell us a little bit about your background. You have a non-linear path to where you ended up, and tell us where you came from and how you got to where you are.
Yes, it is non-linear. I started in my first life. I was a scientist and working in academia, and I changed course midstream and started a consulting business. So the very short version is that my interest changed. I became very interested in how people collaborate or not. So that was in scientific teams and in the classroom. And now that's my focus in my consulting business.
Okay, helping build more collaborative teams and groups and organizations. Excellent. And how did you land on sociocracy?
I had been running my consulting business for several years and found out about sociocracy and recognized that it had answers to many of the issues that I had seen in companies. That was one of my paths. The other is, in addition to being a member of the Sociocracy Consulting Group, I'm also a partner in Blueprint of We California. And around the same time, I found out about the Blueprint of We collaboration process, which also helps people collaborate more effectively, coming at it from a different lens. And so I work with both of those.
So presumably they dovetail well with each other?
They do, and I do sometimes combine them.
Okay. And for those who are interested, and you can refer to this throughout, in the chat room is a link to how you can get a hold of Sheella, some of the information, some of this slide she's going to present. There's also how you can contact me directly, as well as a link to my website. So Sheella, many people, when we talk about self-management, they have a lot of misconceptions or a lot of evolving conceptions. I think the name that most people are familiar with when I have conversations is Holacracy, and largely because of Holacracy's work with Zappos, or maybe I should say the other way around, Zappos work with Holacracy. And we did have an interview with John Bunch from Zappos, and as well as Brian Robertson. So the number one question for people who are not familiar with sociocracy is, what is it?
Well, as you said, it's a way to run a self-organizing system, self-managing organization. So do you want me to focus on sociocracy or talk about the differences from holacracy? What order would you like?
Well, however you want to take it. Just kind of give us a sense of, yes, we will talk about the differences and the similarities. So if you want to define sociocracy around that, that's great.
No, I'll start out just talking about sociocracy. So it is, the word literally means governance by associates. Socius being Latin for people who have an association with each other, as opposed to democracy, which is governance by the masses, not necessarily people that you have an association with. So that's the root of the word. It was developed in the early 70s in the Netherlands, and it's a whole systems approach to decision-making, governance, and project management. And it creates more inclusive and resilient and effective organizations. Everybody has a voice in the policies that govern their work, and yet they get stuff done. Those two, people having a voice and getting stuff done, are sometimes seen as incompatible. So that's the short version.
It does seem incompatible, and we'll get into the weeds in a few minutes to talk about how, as you have discussed in some of our conversations, it actually increases efficiency. But
yes,
Go ahead. I interrupted you. Take it away.
No, I was pausing for a breath there. Your timing was just fine.
So tell us, before we delve into the differences and similarities to Holacracy, tell us a little bit about how organizations that adopt this, what is the management system?
Every group, it might make sense for me to show my slide at this point.
Yeah, I think that would be very revealing
Okay.
and helpful.
Give me a moment to, I have 2 slides about this, so give me a moment and I'll share my screen.
Okay.
Okay, are you seeing it?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, so this is actually, this is the slide I want. So this is a linear structure for operations, and this you've seen a zillion times.
Yes, usually 90 degrees with the board.
Usually 90 degrees, and you'll see in a moment why I've rotated it. That's intentional.
Okay.
Gerard Endenberg was the person who developed the Sociocratic circle method, which is the form that we use. That was his original formulation, and he developed it to run his electrical. He was CEO of an electrical engineering company in the Netherlands called Endenberg Electric Technique. He looked at an org chart like this and said, "I'm an electrical engineer. I know about power systems. I would never design a power system this way. There's no feedback, so you can't steer it." So that's what led to the development of all of Sociocracy. Each group of people who works together on a regular basis periodically gets together for a circle meeting to set policy about how they're going to work, including how they work together. So let me show you. So this group of people will form a circle. This group of people will form a circle. And I'll show you what that looks like. So these are those departments. I had showed 3 departments. It could be more. This is a general circle with 2 people from each of the departments, and this, they call them the general circle, the general management circle. They coordinate the activities of all of the entire organization.
So Sheella, one of the things that stand out to me immediately, listening to your description and going back to the previous slide, is that one of the significant differences is that there's feedback coming back to the general circle.
Exactly, and that's the reason to have the double link. There's 2 people who are full members of both circles.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that it can be very difficult for one person to accurately transmit information in both directions. So this group of people, if the elected links were not there, the elected link is chosen by the department circle to represent them on the general circle. If the elected links were not there, that would be the management team. And they do meet just as a management team for operations. And then when it comes time for setting policies, the elected links or elected representatives, depending on what terminology you use, are there. So that gives feedback in both directions.
Okay, so let's walk through a pragmatic example. Let's take the blue circle there on the right. Let's say this is the marketing circle.
Mm-hmm.
And how does the marketing circle in Sociocracy interface with production?
Suppose this orange circle is production. They both are represented in the general management circle. So each circle, when the circle is set up, there's a well-defined aim or set of aims and domain of responsibility and authority. So the decisions are made. It's a distributed leadership model. The decisions are pushed out to where the work is being done. So the marketing circle has responsibility and authority for decisions that govern activities that just affect the marketing circle. The same for production, for the production circle. Anything that affects both of them would be kicked up to the general circle, and it would be part of their domain. And there are people from both of those circles in it. So either one of these circles, if they're initiating a proposal, could bring a proposal to the general circle, but then the other circles are in on it to give consent.
So in a again, let's get pretty concrete here. So production is making toys for Christmas time. Marketing wants to run a special that may increase demand by 20%. They would go through the general circle to get a sign off on that. Is there a way that they can just go directly to production and bypass the general circle and go, hey, we've got this idea?
The formal way is to go up to the general circle, but it's not, it depends. It depends on how their domain is defined, and how their domain for responsibility and authority is defined. And they may be talking to each other regularly, in which case fine. So it can work either way.
Okay. And what's the advantage of going through the general circle, the green circle, versus just directly talking to the people that are more directly in the loop, production?
Well, suppose this is the sales circle, and sales is impacted by this too. So if other groups are also impacted by it, you would want to get input and consent from everybody before going ahead with it.
Okay, so the general circle is representatives from each of the relevant circles that are involved in getting the product or the service to the customer.
Yes.
Okay. And how are the operational leader and the elected link chosen?
Good question. So the operational leader is chosen by the general circle to lead that department circle. So the arrow starts with the circle that is choosing the person, and they choose it by consent, and the arrow points to the circle that they are leading, and then the elected link is selected by consent by this circle to represent them on the general circle.
So in your experience with the different organizations and reading the case studies, how fluid are the operational leaders and the elected link? Is that role changing frequently, or once it's decided, does that usually those same people carry that load for an indefinite period of time?
Not indefinite. Every policy decision, and selecting somebody to a role is a type of policy decision. Every policy decision in the Sociocratic Circle method has a time length and a measurement attached to it. And so that's true for selection of people to roles too. So we always indicate a time period. At the end of that time period, we're going to have a new selection process and choose somebody again. And it could be the same person. And in between, we would give them a performance review, and the performance review is done in a circle. And their development plan goes to the circle for consent.
And how does the circle itself determine new members? In traditional structures, the manager does the hiring.
Yes. So that's up to the organization how they want to do it. Anyone joining a new circle, the entire circle has to consent to working together. So at some point, people will have to consent. Some organizations choose to have, if somebody's being hired into this department, for example, mm-hmm. some organizations choose to require consent of that circle before accepting the person. It could just be a team that's doing the interviews. It's however they set it up. It just needs to be clear. So but it's easy to get input from anybody that you want to include in the decision.
I'm going to invite you to come back to speaker view here. I think if we need to refer back to that, we can
Glenn, can I just explain one other thing about this slide?
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to explain why it's flipped on its side.
Please.
So what this slide shows, we're used to thinking of the hierarchy as a hierarchy of power, But what this slide shows is that it's actually a hierarchy of level of abstraction rather than power. So over here, this is the board circle. It's not labeled here.
Mhm.
They have, as you move towards the left, you move towards a big picture perspective, long range perspective, and towards the right, you move towards a more specific or more concrete perspective. There might be more circles here. And the reason why that's important is I think of it like a living system in the human body, that every piece of it has an essential piece of every part of it has a piece of the whole. In the human body, the organs talk to each other. And if you had the heart and the lung and the gut making a decision together, and any two of them could overrule the third, if the heart and the lung overruled the gut, you could be dead tomorrow, or at least very sick. We can't afford to lose the voice lose the information that any part of the whole system has. That it's the same in an organization. We need the perspective of the people who are looking out for the long range, the entire organization, the long range perspective, and the voice of the people on the front lines who are likely to be closer to the customer. They each have a different piece of the picture, of the perspective, and we need all those voices. And what this method allows us to do is to get all that information.
Okay.
So now I'll stop sharing my screen.
All right, great. So this raises a whole host of pragmatic questions. And I want to, again, compare traditional structures to sociocracy and get a sense of where the advantages are of using sociocracy.
Mm-hmm.
So in a traditional structure, if I'm in head of production, I'm the manager in production, and we're lagging, and I determine, gee, we need 2 more people. Then depending on my level of authority, I usually have to run it up the flagpole to somebody higher than me and say, okay, we need 2 more people. They can either say, okay, we've got it in the budget, or forget it. You can't make do with what you have. How does that process work in sociocracy?
It might be the same, it might be different. It depends how the domains are defined. So one of the parameters that could be part of the definition of the domain is what budget can you spend on your own before you need to go to the next broader circle.
And that is decided in the general circle, or again, is that from organization to organization they make those decisions?
No. So I'm going to go back to the slide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you can see my slide?
Yes.
Okay, so the board, which in sociocracy we call the top circle, the top circle sets the domain and the aim for the organization and for the general circle. The general circle sets the aims and the domains for each of the department circles. And suppose this marketing circle has some sub-circles attached to it. For example, there might be a website circle. The marketing circle sets the aim and domain for any circles that are more specific than that department circle. So the budget is set by whatever the relevant circle is. Does that make sense? The budget for this circle is set by this circle. The budget for the general circle is set by the top circle.
Okay. And as with any organization, as conditions in real time become more fluid.
Yes.
There's more sales, there's less sales, there's seasonal changes, then the decision-making process could get speeded up.
Absolutely.
Because you have that feedback circle.
Absolutely.
Feedback link.
Absolutely. Okay. Usually there are regular policy meetings on the calendar, but if there's not, or if you need one more frequently, because policy meetings happen usually less frequently than operational meetings, the meetings are different and for different purposes.
Okay.
Usually if somebody needs a meeting more frequently, any member of a circle can ask the meeting administrator for that circle to call a special meeting.
So let's go into some of the specifics of the circles outside of the general circle. That seems to be fairly clear. You've used the phrase a couple of times of decision by consent. Can you explain what that is and how that works?
Absolutely. We do not use majority vote. There's an exception to that, which I'll mention in a moment. The default decision-making method at every level is by consent, which is one specific type of consensus, which I will explain in just a moment. Having said that, a group can decide by consent that particular types of decisions would use some other decision-making method. For example, they could delegate some set of decisions to an individual person, or they could decide we're going to use majority vote for this type of decision. So there other methods of decision can be under that umbrella. Mm-hmm. But the main method is consent, which means absence of paramount objections. The basis for an objection is if we put a policy into place and we think it would jeopardize the aim of the circle or of the organization, that's the basis for an objection. It's not personal preference. If I couldn't do my job in that circle towards our commonly agreed upon aim that we agreed upon when the circle was set up, or afterwards if it's modified, then I raise an objection. So if you and I were in a group of several people making a decision and I were facilitating, I would say, Robin, do you sorry, I just realized your screen says Robin Zander rather than Glenn Martin.
Okay.
I just read that. I would say, Glenn, do you have an objection to this proposal? And you would say yes or no. And then I ask myself, because I'm a member of the circle, and then I ask everybody in turn. Either the answer is no objection, or yes, and here's my objection. We pool all of those objections and own them as a group and problem solve them until we find resolutions to them. Once we have resolved them, that's it. The decision is made. And until then, we don't have a decision. So we're not actually seeking agreement. We want to surface the objections because they lead to a better proposal. We want to know if somebody sees problems or risks that we can't afford to take.
So every single person voices, in essence, an agreement or an objection. An agreement is a lack of an objection.
That's correct.
Okay, so it's not explicitly an agreement, but they don't see a reason that this would jeopardize the mission, the purpose.
The one way of asking the question that we use is, can you live with this? Meaning, can you still do your job if we carry out this policy?
Okay, so I want to get into the human side of this, because that seems to be where all of the self-management, self-organizing systems and structures run into challenges. And we've heard some stories on previous webinars and in conversations I've had where people try Holacracy, they try something, and then a new management team comes in and says, we're not interested in this, blah, blah, blah. But let's come back to the consent. I mean, I've been in a lot of meetings, and when people go, can you live with this? I'm imagining somebody probably has a really solid objection, but just goes, I'm tired of meetings. I just want to go back to work, and says, yeah, I can live with this. How does Sociocracy make it safe, make it part of the culture to where people feel like they're not a pain in the neck for bringing up objections, or other people aren't looking at them and going, oh, Glenn again, this is the 14th objection you've had this month, whatever. How does all of that work to overcome two basic human instincts? One is to avoid conflict and the other is to disrupt.
That's a great question. In fact, many people find sociocratic circle meetings energizing. That may come as a surprise. Not all meetings. There's ups and downs.
Right.
But overall, oh my goodness, I remember one meeting I was facilitating in a client organization. It was a meeting in the evening. Everybody had been working all day. That's when they scheduled the meeting. And people were tired coming into it. Several of them said, I don't know if I can stay awake for a 2-hour meeting. And at the end of that 2 hours, everybody was energized. So because there's often really creative thinking. And I find a minimum of people who are just being disruptive. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that, especially with practice, they know that their voice is going to be heard. Sometimes people are disruptive because it's the only way they can figure out, whether they figured this out consciously or unconsciously, the only way they can figure out they think they're going to be heard. But the other is that everybody needs training in how to have meetings this way, and the facilitator receives special training. So the meeting formats are really carefully thought out, so everybody really does have a voice, and it seldom gets ground down.
And when there's an objection or a series of objections, you mentioned, and then the circle resolves them. What's the process for resolving objections?
Oh, there's a number of different ways we can do it. So we make a lot of use of rounds, in which in a round everybody has a turn to speak. They can pass, but everybody has a chance to speak without interruption and without crosstalk. So, and that, it sounds like it would take a lot of time and be inefficient, but in fact, quite often, quite amazing things happen from rounds, and brand new ideas come out, and people really listen to each other. That's the other thing. And when meetings are getting ground down, in my experience, it's often that people aren't really listening to each other. They're trying to convince each other of why the other person is wrong and they're right. And that completely shifts using rounds in sociocracy.
Partly because people can't interrupt each other, correct?
Yes, and they really do listen to each other, because when it's my turn to listen, I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say next to prove you wrong. I'm actually listening. So that allows me to actually change my view.
Okay, so there's a series of rounds. Everybody has the opportunity to either pass or express.
So one possibility for resolving an objection is to do a round. The facilitator will call for a round. Does anybody who has an idea about how to resolve this? Or they could ask the person who initially made the proposal, if it was an individual. Could be the whole group that developed the proposal, and there's a whole process for developing a proposal. But they could ask that person. It could be something that requires some research, so they could assign it to a helping circle, 2 or 3 people, to do the research and come back to the next meeting with a proposal. There's about 10 different ways, probably more, different ways to resolve an objection. One of them is, if there are like 2 or 3 people who have differing opinions, to just have kind of those 2 or 3 people have a discussion in front of everybody else, but for a set period of time, because you mostly want to do things that are involving everyone.
And if somebody still doesn't agree, then what happens?
Well, it depends. There's sometimes an objection, there is not a way to resolve an objection, and we need to go back to the drawing board and figure out a new proposal. Sometimes they have an objection because there seems to be some risk to them. Remember I said that every policy has a time period and a measurement attached to it. And so every policy is viewed as an experiment. So suppose the time period for a particular proposal is 6 months. The facilitator or somebody else might say to the person raising the objection, what if we reduced it from 6 months to 2 months? Would that make this a safe enough experiment to try? And the person would say, yes, for 2 months I can live with it, but I want to make sure that we measure such and such. And they'll say, great, let's make that one of the measurements, and would you be on the measurement team?
Okay.
So sometimes, not always, but sometimes that will take care of it. And sometimes the proposal can't meet the objections, and we need to go back to the drawing board and revise the proposal.
Okay, so it sounds to me that this really goes beyond just giving lip service, and actually is a structure that empowers every single person.
I have seen countless meetings, both the ones that I'm in and where I'm a member of the circle, and of clients, where a proposal seems straightforward coming in, and it ends up much better by the end of the meeting because of this process.
So tell us a bit about the downstream benefits. of using these types of conversations, this type of organization in terms of employee retention, in terms of absenteeism, in terms of profit and loss?
All of those improve. Employee engagement increases, retention increases, sick days decrease. The companies need to be nimble and agile in the modern economy, and this provides a way to do that. It means using the Sociocratic Circle method means that the organization can get ideas from people in all parts of an organization. Many companies say that people are their best resource, but oh my goodness, I've had so many conversations with people who work in companies and say, all we have to do is such and such to fix that problem, but they don't have a way of getting their ideas put into effect. So it makes it real to make people, their best resource. They get better meetings, not necessarily immediately, but over time. Meeting time generally decreases. I've heard of it decreasing as much as 50%. As I say, not immediately because there's a learning curve. And it's also really good for leadership development. Because of the selection process, it surfaces people, the real leaders in any part of the organization that the people at the top might not know about. And people get to they're able to get into positions that really play to their passion and skills and strengths. So it's really good for leadership. So those are some of the main ones.
And I want to come back to this empowerment. What's clear is that if somebody has an objection, sees that certain policies and procedures are not in the best interest of the organization, they have a very strong voice there. What about introducing policies or innovations that others may not agree with? Are there forms of appeal, so to speak? I have a great idea for a new product, and my circle is like, we really aren't interested. But I'm adamant about this could really help the organization. Are there processes where I can, in essence, take it to a different circle?
I'd have to think about that. It's funny, I haven't seen that happen.
Okay.
What I have seen, I'm sure it could, but I haven't. Or what I have seen happen is somebody brings an idea to their circle, and other people convince them, let's wait on that, or let's do this other thing first, and come back to that later. What I have seen happen is there's a story that's a classic story now about Edinburgh Electrotechnique, the company where the Sociocratic Circle method was developed, where they were about to do major layoffs, and somebody in a different department that wouldn't have even been affected directly by the layoffs came up with an idea to avoid the layoffs, and it went up through the circles to the top circle quite quickly, and his idea was consented to by the top circle, and they averted all the layoffs. So that's the reverse situation that you're talking about.
Right. Okay. So one of the differences that I'm going to just point out with Holacracy is in Holacracy, and I want to preface by saying there are a number of self-management systems, but Holacracy, there are circles and then there are roles. And so if somebody has a role within a circle, they have complete autonomy for decision-making process. Good, bad, or indifferent, it is different from Sociocracy, where decisions are made in a circle. And then if a circle makes a policy decision, do they need to go back to the general circle to get their sign off on that?
It depends whose domain that type of decision is in.
Okay.
If it's in the domain for their own circle, then no. But if it's in the domain for the next broader circle, then yes.
Okay. And it sounds, well, let me ask a few other general questions, and then I want to go into a few more specifics about the implementation.
And I don't know if you want to return also to the differences between Holacracy and Sociocracy.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I'm not sure that that's going to be all that productive.
Okay.
Tell me about diversity and inclusion. Is there anything inherently in a sociocratic model that would encourage hiring of diverse people? It sounds like diverse opinions are equally as embraced. I'm thinking about this was in the Netherlands. This was founded, which is a reasonably homogenous cultural. That's changing quickly, but it wasn't in the outsets. But is there anything about sociocracy that would naturally attract more diversity, or is that like any other organization that's a conscious decision?
Attract more diversity. That's an interesting question. There are definitely things aspects of sociocracy that I think would help foster diversity, support diversity within the company. And as far as attracting them, I know that companies where the employees have a voice in the policy decisions, that people are more engaged and they tend to get more people applying. So whether that's specific to getting more diverse people applying, I don't know. I don't have any data on that. That would be interesting to find out. I would love to start collecting some data, by the way, to see if sociocracy helps a company handle the diversity and increase the diversity, both in terms of retention and in terms of promotion. Because I hypothesize that it would, and there's a couple specific aspects of sociocracy that I think support that.
Well, I'm just going to throw this out to anybody who happens to be listening. If you work in a company or you would like to, if this gets you all jazzed, gee, this would be a great study. You can contact Sheella through LinkedIn. I've also put up at the top of the chat room, and we'll review that one more time before we close. I think that would be a benefit to all organizations that are looking at diversity and inclusion and how to bring that out of theory into reality. So when I'm listening to all these benefits and I'm thinking I'm a CEO of a company, I'd be foolish not to use it. So why isn't it ubiquitous? What are some of the objections to sociocracy? What are some of the failures, the failed to launch?
Yeah, so there's the failure to launch, and then there's failure after launch, which are two separate things.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has to do with the mindset. I think a lot of leaders think in terms of that the way to endure is to control the structures and the processes. But in fact, in a self-organizing system, that's not the source of endurance. It's resilience and flexibility that is. It feels like giving up control in order to get that. And that's a leap for many people. It's a leap for leaders. It's also a leap for people at other levels of the organization who now have a voice that maybe they think they like just going to work every day and having somebody else make the decisions. So it's a leap for everybody. It's a culture change. And some of the situations that I know of where a company started out using the Sociocratic Circle method and then stopped, it was because the person or a few people at the top reached my interpretation of it is they reached their level of their comfort level, and then beyond that was going to be, there was discomfort associated with it. I think those gaps can be, I think that can be bridged, but it takes some conscious attention to do that.
I would think it would take a lot of conscious attention. So let's go back to the everyday person, not at the top or the far left side of the circles. It's one thing to get hired into a company that has sociocracy already. You mentioned there are some people who just want to be told what to do. They want to go to work. How do those people fit in, who don't want to go to meetings to decide all of these policies. And I'm going to come back to Holacracy for a second. When Zappos implemented Holacracy, they had a buyout program. So anybody that felt like this doesn't work for you, will give you some severance pay. They still have that policy. People go through their initial training and they do a 30-day training. And then if people don't feel like they belong here, they have some financial avenues for leaving. What happens when Sociocracy is put in place? Is there a typical exodus of a subset of people who just go, this isn't for me, I don't want to do this?
I'm not really sure. There certainly could be. I saw some numbers recently about number of people who leave when there's a change in a company. But if it's for this kind of a change, there's typically more, the applicant pool increases by a higher percentage than the people leaving. So there's trade-offs, but I don't have any specific data about that for Sociocracy. I do have wonderful stories of people making the transformation and their lives changing. And there's something about the structure and the processes that support that. Even just by themselves, that has been a surprise to me. I really had underestimated the impact of the structure until I started working with Sociocracy.
Well, it fits in nicely to all of the responsive principles of the experimentation, the balance between purpose and profit, and people feeling more connected with the day-to-day operations. People become much more engaged. Is there an ideal size company? So again, making a comparison to Holacracy, Brian Robertson identified about 2,000 people as being, once it gets above that, the company gets to be too large to effectively implement. In Sociocracy, is there too small of a group or too large of a group for it to work effectively?
Yeah, good question. The smallest that I know of is 3.
Three different circles, 3 people?
3 people, absolutely. In our consulting, the Sociocracy Consulting Group, we have 6 members currently. We're in 3 different countries. We have multiple circles. Some people are in more than one circle. But we found, it was a surprise to us when we first started. We all met in one big circle. And then we said, okay, it's time to set up a Sociocratic circle structure. And we were surprised ourselves that now we started really getting stuff done, even with just 6 people. The largest that I know of that has implemented Sociocracy company-wide is about 2,000. And I know of several organizations that size. I know of larger international companies that have used it in one division. But I do not know yet of a company that has implemented company-wide more than 2,000. But that's just what I know of. So it's possible that there are more.
And are you familiar with companies that utilize it when there's a remote workforce or a distributed workforce, people working in different cities, different countries?
Absolutely. My consulting group, none of us are in the same city, and we're in 3 different countries. And I worked with one organization. I've worked with others that are virtual, but I'm thinking of one in particular that's almost entirely a virtual organization. They have 1 or 2 in-person retreats a year. And they just started getting so much more done when they started implementing Sociocracy.
And we're not going to have the time in the remainder of this interview to go into all of the details about the Constitution and the agreements and things of that nature. How difficult is it to implement from a more traditional or a responsive leaning type organization that already has some buy-in on these ideas? What are we looking at time-wise? An organization that maybe has 500 employees to get trained, to implement it, to get the feedback, to get some of the big kinks out. What's the time process?
It depends in part on how fast they want to move ahead and what kind of resource they want to put into it. I've seen organizations, smaller organizations, not 500, implement it all at once, where everybody will be trained all at once, and we'll coach the circles for the first few meetings after the training. And then for larger company, usually the way they do it is they'll start with one part of the company or with one project, and then roll it out from there. Ideally, they will they'll designate one or more people who are internal to the company who will get additional training and support from us to become internal trainers and coaches for the circles, so that they're not always dependent on an external consultant. And so it depends on how fast they roll out all of that. I've seen a big change in a few weeks when an organization starts implementing sociocracy. Certainly within a few months. For a real culture change, for that to be embedded in all their processes, the number that occurs to me is 3 years. But I'm sure it's shorter for some and longer for others.
3 years is probably about the mean, just because people just take a while to adapt, and they tend
and it's we all have lifelong habits, and we
Right.
have to change some of those habits for this.
Right, and under stress, we regress to our previously learned behaviors. And the process, if somebody is interested listening to this, they would contact you, and you would have a conversation with them.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
The best way to contact you is
Well, there's two ways.
okay.
So we've set up a website, web page on our website for people to go to from this interview, and it's sociocracyconsulting.com/responsive.
And that URL is in the chat.
Yes, and that has information on how to contact me. It also has a link to a new white paper that we've just written about sociocracy. And so you can get that on that web page, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Excellent.
And I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone.
And just want to make a couple of announcements regarding responsive.org. We are launching the first Responsive X in San Francisco in November 8th on the topic of optimizing mental health in the workplace. I will be emceeing that and facilitating part of that conference. If you want some more information about that, or you want to register, currently you can go to my website, 180circle.com, and that URL is there, and there will be a link to registering. If you want to communicate with me at Glenn, it's glenn@onecircle.com. If you want to find out more about responsive activities in the future, you can go to responsive.org and sign up for their newsletter. So you offer let me turn this into a question. Do you offer some classes and courses or some introductions for people who are going, I'd like to learn more about this, but we're not ready to sign on? And how would people get a hold of that, and what is it that you offer?
Well, there's two ways for that. If you go to that link, the sociocracyconsulting.com/responsive, directs you to the listing of events on our website.
Mm-hmm.
So some of those are scheduled. Right now, they're not scheduled very far in advance. So if you're looking for something that's not there, please just contact me.
Okay.
And either I'll tell you when the next one is that we just haven't gotten listed yet, or we can set up a special one for your organization.
And you mentioned earlier that some organizations decide to introduce this just in a department.
Yes.
See how that works.
Yes.
Is there, in some of the tools and some of the trainings that you provide, is that sufficient for somebody to go, before we go system-wide, let's just do it in our circle of 6 people or 8 people or something like that? Can they implement that without going through a full engagement with you?
They can.
Okay.
Yes.
And presumably you're available for consultation on that. So
Yes.
if they get
They're
stuck.
still gonna need training, but it's gonna be more limited. Yeah.
Okay. So obviously you're sold on this. You've been doing this for a while, and you're a big proponent, not just a proponent, but you're propelling people and offering tools for collaboration in the workplace. How do you see this, both sociocracy and self-organizing, self-management, playing out in the workplace in the next 10, 20 years? Do you think it's inevitable, or do you think it's subset of organizations are well suited and others aren't? What's your view on that?
Well, my guess is that companies that continue to stick to the old top-down command and control, I just think they're going to need to change in order to survive in this economy.
Mm-hmm.
That's my prediction. I could be wrong. So, but that's exciting to me. The exciting part of that to me is that this will become more common, and what's particularly meaningful to me about this is creating environments where everyone's contribution is valued and where people love going to work every day. And I've seen that happen in organizations, and so that's exciting that we can create more workplaces that way. The downside is that some companies aren't going to do it, and that will follow, keep going down the old path. The advantage of getting everybody's input and everybody's best thinking and engaging everybody is both that they're more engaged and lead more fulfilling lives. The companies get the best thinking of everybody, but it's also necessary not only to run the companies, but just to solve all of the issues facing humanity right now. We're going to need everybody's thinking.
Yes, I agree with that. So this has been delightful. For those who are intrigued about self-management, we will have, it's a joint effort with Responsive, another talk about self-management systems without a focus on a specific system, but more in terms of general self-management. That'll be November 5th with Doug Kirkpatrick. You can check out my website, 180circle.com or responsive.org if you want some more information. Those are not listed yet, but they will be shortly. Any final thoughts before I let you go, Sheella? This has been quite enlightening. I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, I can suggest an experiment for people to try. Next time you're stuck in a meeting, just try a round.
And give us the rules one more time.
Everybody gets a turn to talk. In turn, it's not popcorn. And people can pass, but everybody gets a chance to talk without interruption and without crosstalk.
Fantastic. All right, and if those of you try it, drop Sheella or I a line and let us know how it's gone.
Please do.
All right, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Glenn.